All right, so the eye itself, just going to keep with this red here, has this kind of hard point of the lip ditch, not lip ditch, the tear duct, and then it tends to come around, and you want to watch how it's coming around. There's a little shelf here people tend to forget, and they'll spend a lot of time on eyelashes. You shouldn't. But then they completely miss these two shelves that pop in, and the shelves themselves are these spaces where the eyelash actually sits, and these two things come together to close. Again, they're covering this orb of the eye, and so this shape is super important. That shape is super important. How that shelf sits in there is important. Next, the eye itself tends to, unless somebody's opening their eye real big, it tends to sit something like this, and there tends to be a shadow over the eye because of the shelf, and that tends to be because light comes from above, right? So you want to pay attention to that. People who are younger have this thing called liminal rings in their eyes. So where the sclera, or the white of the eye, meets the iris itself, that muscle tends to be a little darker there. As people get older, that gets lighter. And so people tend to, in Photoshop, they'll tend to like darken these rings. But then the eye itself, depending on the pigmentation or the amount of melanin in the iris, obviously you've got all these iris muscles. There tends to be, if the eye is lighter in color, there tends to be a darkening up here, so you can darken that, and then a lightening of that same stuff down here. You will look for the kind of moments where the white of, or where that little white or gleam of the eye to make it glassy would be. You don't really want to do that first or anything like that, but pay attention to where those are. They should emulate the light of the space as well. So just be aware of that. Just gonna give myself a darker iris. And now I'll pop in and give myself a little gleam here. All right. And so then the other structure to look for is there tends to be a fold in the eye right here. And this is where the extra eyelid comes in, so pay attention to that. Again, this is all depending on ethnicity and age and genetics, so you'll have to be aware of that. And then the brow, you know, watch where that starts, watch what this looks like, watch what this looks like. And then this shape too, watch that shape. This is where that bone, the orbital bone, is getting curled around. And then you'll want to watch to see how the eye sits in on this side. Next, there's a little shelf for the base of the eye. You'll watch that shelf, that shape. And then there's the next shape of where the avicularis oris goes. In profile, I'm going to do that same thing again. So if I have a kind of a sphere here, remember that this shelf sits something like this. You want to watch how that goes up and underneath. Again, you have a shelf that's coming around. You have that little space that's here, and then the space that's there. So you'll watch the zygomatic bone, and you'll look at the space here between the eye and the nose as it goes into the corrugator muscle. The iris is actually something that sits on top. There's a lit lens here that sits on top, and then that same shading stuff applies only if it's important. Let's say the person's wearing mascara or has like the kind of spider leg lashes. Um, should you put those lashes in any kind of detail other than just a little bit of shade on top of that surface? So these are the things that you're looking for in the eye's profile. Next, let's do the nose. Again, with the nose, think about this general shape of the face. And so the nose is sitting above and in front of everything. And so inherently when you're drawing the nose, you're doing a foreshadowed thing. And so if I've got the base of my nose here, I tend to try to pay attention to what this shape is. This is the front-on view, right? And I want to pay attention to how this shape goes into the lips and where the nostrils, do they curl in or do they curl down? Like different genetics are going to cause different things here. I never ever do the full nostril unless I'm looking, like if a camera was down here, I won't ever actually see the full jelly bean of the nostril. You want to look for how the nose sits between the orbicularis, oculi, oris, and then this nasalis muscle. And then you're also looking at this general shape that is made from the nasal cavity to the nasal bone. And you can get some width information from this. So, but you tend to be looking for the top of this shape, where that bone is and what that relationship is there for that. And then the eyes are coming in here. This is where the orbital is. And then you're looking at that kind of nasalis muscle that's coming in and around. And then the shape of the nostrils themselves. From the side, you want to think about what that front shape is doing, what the cartilage is doing, what this nasal muscle is doing as it's coming off of the nasal cavity, where, based on this point to this point, the nostril sits, how high the nostril is in relation to this, and how far down, and what does that connection look like. Again, you probably won't be able to see the nostrils in profile, and a bit of a mistake is to over accentuate the nostril itself. So that is what I tend to look for when I'm looking for the nose in profile, is these general shapes. Now the lips, I'll do those last. So front on, think of the lips, remember, as you have these points that need to connect, right? And so we tend to have this muscle here. This is like this pillowy muscle, and you can look for this shape. Some people it's connected, some people it's comes down a little bit, but there's like this kind of muscle that happens right here in our lips, and then there's yet another muscle that happens right here. And you'll want to pay attention to what shape this makes. And you'll also want to pay attention to how this curls into or doesn't the way that the orbicularis oris works. Next, we have this muscle and this muscle, that muscle, and then these muscles. Oops. So as I'm looking at lips, this tends to be what I'm looking for, and how these things are sitting together. From the side, I've got that muscle that I talked about before, which kind of curls like this, and then this muscle, which kind of comes in, and then that muscle right here tends to sit a little proud, depending, oops, that's a little too much protruded. Tends to sit like that. and then this tends to sit like this, and that's what's creating that line right there. And then you can kind of pay attention to what that muscle's doing, this muscle's doing. And one of the things that's tricky about lips is they kind of curve around in space, and people tend to forget that, especially if they're drawing them front or in the side. And so you always want to think about, okay, well, what's on this other side, and just kind of hint at that, and how that muscle is forming around there. But yeah, the top of the lips are something that's important. This shape is super important. That shape is super important. This line that is made is super important. The other thing you can think of is typically they're lit from above, and so there is going to be a value where this tucks in because this is going to be shading out, and then there'll be a highlight right here where that curve starts as it comes around. And so think about that when you're painting that line and how dark it is. The same thing here, there tends to be a shade that happens. The last thing, and this is usually the last thing that I will talk about when I'm doing portraits, is looking at where the light source is going to create what kind of shadows you're going to see. Typically, there are shadows that you can always watch for because typically light is coming from above. You can pretty much always find a shadow here. And in this case, we do see that there is a shadow. And then you can always find a shadow under the nose on top of the lip in the maxilla area. And in this case, we see it here. We see that same shadow right here. And then you should be able to find a shadow on the from the chin onto the neck somewhere. Those shadows are going to be really important to look for. So in every portrait that you're working on, look for those bigger structures and shadows too. Just gonna be working right on top of the model at first, and then I will do a second one. So first things first, with hard points, what we had talked about in the last video was looking for different hard points. And in this case, right on top of this, I can see the orbital bone right here, and I can see the orbital bone right here. When you're looking at something, this is somebody who's incredibly fit, and so when you're looking for the bone, in this case, what we're actually looking for is kind of a turn. And so this is the turn for the orbicularis oculi, that muscle that sits in here, and then that's all kind of curving in and working on that orbital bone. And so we see this kind of arch that's happening where this is definitely a plane that's sitting this way, and this is definitely a plane that's sitting this way. And so as I'm looking for where that actual turn happens, and that is my hard point. And so I can assume that his orbital is something like this. And then for the next, we have the nasal. And remember that nasal bone's coming just like this. And from here in, the rest of that is going to be cartilage. So just like I said, watch that point of the nasal bone as it leaves and goes into cartilage. This is a moment that's really super important for people to kind of pay attention to. And so we also see, based on where the portrait is, we see the top of this orbital, and then all of this stuff in here is going to be orbicularis oculi and eyelid together. Next, so we see that this is kind of coming up. I'm just defining those two different shapes as hard points. Next, we see the zygomatic arch, and in this case, we see this point right here. And that is, again, just like before, that is the arch as it comes across. It's actually going to be a little bit more angled like this. And then all of this other stuff sits inside that arch. So if you remember, that's the arch and where the bone is going here. So in this case, for the hard point, I'm specifically looking at this spot right here, and then this spot right here. These are the hard point, and you can literally see, if you were a painter, this is a shelf that has like one angle to it, and you would be painting this kind of motion. If you are drawing, you get to choose, right? You get to choose where you want to put your values, but I tend to see them kind of moving like this. So that's all hard points for the zygomatic arch. I'm just gonna leave these two hard points. And now I'm gonna follow this down and look for the jawline. And in this case, this person is incredibly thin, but they just have extra skin right here. And so that is not the jawline. This is just adipose or extra skin tissue. The jawline, if you look, is actually sitting right here. Right? Yeah. Something like that. Excellent. And then other hard points, the moment where the philtrum or the lip ditch, right, hits the base of the nose cartilage. That's another hard point. And then lastly, I think we have the chin itself, the mentalis. We have that as a hard point. And then we have the top of the frontalis here, this muscle that goes into the corrugator muscle. But that's not a hard point. Just the frontalis itself is the hard point. You can basically see this dude's skull right here because that frontalis muscle is such a thin little plate. All right, so those would be the hard points. Now let's work with the hard points and measure in where the other things that I would be looking for, which would be the specific parts of the physiognomies. So I'm gonna just change color here. I'll be in the same layer, and we're looking at these different hard point, or the different hard points in relation to these other shapes. So when we deal with the eye, I've got this motion right here, or that point right there, and you can see that that comes over the base of the eyelid. And then it's really, really hard to see. We might be able to throw an adjustment layer on here and just increase that brightness a bit so we can see in there. I'm kind of cheating just so that I can see where that looks to go. So yeah, it's kind of curling up, in, and around. Let's I'll turn this layer off here, but this is really just to be able to see where my I don't need the navigator right now. I'm not doing full compositions. Okay. Just to see where this is. So it kind of, the actual eyelid itself is tucking in right here and coming down and around. Okay. Turn that off. For this one, we see the eyelid shadows. Don't really see a lot of information here, so I'm just gonna kind of skip that. It's more contour anyway, where the figure meets the ground. And then the next one I'm gonna be looking for is where the nose kind of comes in, where the top of the nostril is, bottom of the nostril, and where this shape is. I'm also looking at the kind of lip, how this lip is working. You can see it's kind of tucking in here with the orbicularis oris, and this shape comes in here and shape comes right there. And then you can just follow that line. And those would be some of the hard points. I can also think about where the whole of the ear is. Cool. So now I've got those kinds of things that I would be measuring against. And with that in mind, I can start creating those plumb lines. What's this color? So this line here, if that's one of my starts, and then I'll just do a vertical as well with this one. So the zygum, let's take this guy.
Hey Chris, you right?
What's that?
You're still recording this, right?
I thought I turned recording on. Let's just double check. Yeah, I'm recording.
All right, tight. Okay, because I got a blast.
All right, see you. Bye.
All right. Thanks again.
Of course.
Bye.
So we've got the bottom of the nose, or where it's tucking in, and then I'm also going to grab the eye here. Oops. All right, so that gives me my plumb lines to start measuring things up with. So this right here would be what I would use to actually do the portrait, which is what I'm going to do right now. And we'll start by measuring, I mean, I can take these actual plumb lines themselves and work with the portrait. What I think is going to be an interesting thing is to actually measure it myself with my observation, and then I can put this right on top of it later. So I'm going to go ahead and just do another new layer. Let's say blue coffee, and then observation. Okay, so let's turn off the copy, and now this is just the observation layer. I'm gonna just turn this off here. Alrighty, so what color am I in? I want to be in a different color. Let's just do red. Okay, so I see that is kind of the eye. I'm just giving myself that epicularis, those points for that. And then this actually goes up here. All right, let's start measuring that against something else. So this is where the zygomatic arch kind of comes in. And then follow this down to the base of the nasal cavity, which I'm seeing is right there. So I think that's gonna live somewhere right around here. It's gonna be like that. All right, coming back here. This is the jaw, and I just want to make sure I've got this distance right. I don't think I do. I think it needs to be coming over here a little bit more. And you can see I'm basically just making all these little non-committal lines that I will just go over later on. But just some general directions so I kind of know where I'm at. So if this is here, then I do have a really distinct nasal bone. And this is coming down. So from here. So if I go straight down, that comes in. Okay, and then from here to here, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. And then that's basically a straight line coming this way. So end of his nose is right around here. So if that's his nasal cavity, it's basically straight across. I'm gonna come in a little bit. Yeah, there we are. Just going straight up and down. Okay. And then just follow this line straight to his lip. This is where that turn starts to happen. I'm gonna give myself just a little bit more real estate down here. And that comes basically to the bottom of his lip. And all of this is kind of flush with each other. So There's that turn, comes in, comes out. All right, moving down straight underneath, and then back a little. I think that's where the orbicularis oculi, nope, oris starts to have its turn. And then it's coming straight in like this. So we've got the zygomatic arch here. Feeling a lot more comfortable. I've got the main bits of this. There's a big flat plane here. Just want to get that shape. And looking this way, this line almost goes straight back to the top of the ear. So I'm going to come back in here and just kind of put this in. And then I just want to triangulate that with the jaw. And sure enough, it's kind of right there. So I don't know if I've got that exact for now, but I'm going to say that that's where the ear stuff is. What about the bottom of the ear? Sure. Coming straight back, get the bottom of the ear from the nose. And then again, this kind of acts like a straight line down. So I need to scoot that over here. Yeah, maybe this needs to come back a bit. All right. And then looking at this here, feeling pretty good. I've got some bigger shapes that I want to get in. So this is the inside of the eye. That's the outside of the eye. It's the arch. There's kind of this like circle here to think about. Let's follow this inside over and up to the corrugator. So we've got that brow there that I can kind of use, and it's sitting really what seems to be far over here. Kind of comes straight back. This is somebody who gets their brows done. I assume that's a very distinct shape for the brow. The corrugator muscle that sits here, it kind of comes straight around, and then it flattens out and does basically the same thing here. And this is a much smaller thing here. Okay, getting there. So if I come down and around here, I get the rest of that orbicularis muscle going into the nasalis muscle. And it kind of sits like this. All right, looking at this. So this shape, I'm not going to worry about the actual lashes so much, but I am worried about that shape. Like, look at the distance here versus the distance here. That's a problem. So let's see where that exists. I think it's in the nasal cavity. Like that arc comes here. I think it's like that. Don't want those big lines there, but it's okay. No erasing, no need. Okay, the nose kind of comes around. All right, so the tip of the nose is right here. I'm gonna say that that's it. I'm just gonna commit. Sometimes you gotta commit these lines. I'll get those later. The nostril comes up like this, comes back. Something like that shape. And then I think I had all these measurements off. Okay, now let's pull that this kind of tissue that happens here. We talked about this. This is not quite your nasalis muscle, but it's this adipose that sits on top of it. You can kind of see how that's moving, and then that gets into the kind of fold that is your orbicularis oris. And then we have that all kind of tucking in with the zygomatic arch, and then the masseter. Just make sure we've got these general shapes here. This will all go away once the time comes. So yeah, I kind of squished all that stuff in. I don't want that, so I want to make sure that I've got that at the right at the right space here. So this kind of comes down, and then the orbicularis. The lip comes in. I think that line is pretty accurate. I think that was too far down. Okay. Top of the lip. And it comes up to about here. And then kind of sits like that, sits proud just a bit. Get that angle. And then it's like straight back, and then it comes down. And there's that orbicularis muscle coming in. You can kind of see that shape it's making. Kind of comes like that. Something like this you wouldn't ever consider the stubble. That's just not what you need to be worried about right now. The other thing is if you're drawing real close to the bottom, you're gonna want to scoot up. Like you'll have the tendency to scoot up. So especially if you're working digitally, just like move things around. Notice how basically these guys are all on the same plane. It kind of comes in like this. So if I pulled this down, I would want that to not quite be on the same plane there. So it's curving, and then it comes back, and then there's this like skin that comes underneath. I'm not going to worry too much about that, but I do have the general shape there. And then look at that mastoid muscle, this guy. Such a strong line. I'm just going to kind of pull this guy straight down. And then there's that hard point of the trapezius that's coming right off of the shoulder there. Okay. Sort of the bottom of the ear. We can see that the bottom of the ear in this case is tucking in. And then I'm just going to follow this line straight up, right? You can see that goes all the way down to the mastoid there. And then that gives me where this point is. Ears are funny. Just draw the shapes that you see. Don't try to get every single fold in there. Boy, I think I have this off. Let's see, it goes right underneath the eye. right at the eye. So I had this line off. Everything else was proportionally correct. I just was starting way, way low. All right. And then look at the back of the skull here. We've got some real estate to go before we get to the back of his skull. And then again, this guy is pretty buff, so we can see that this angle needs to be adjusted. Good. All right. So now to the top of the head, I want to say it's about here. Maybe a little lower. I'm just searching for the line right now. That's pretty good. This not too terribly worried about hair at this moment. The hair is a bit of a distractor. I really just want to get the portrait going. All right, I think I've got the main points here that I need. Okay, I haven't saved it in a while. Okay, so let's actually like tuck into the eye here and just looking over here and seeing what I've got. Actually, I'm going to pull the hard points like I said I was going to do that. So let's get the copy going and let's just see how far off I was. Scale was way off, but I made a choice. So what I'll do is I'll stick this observation. Let's zoom out. And let's scale it. So Control T, and I'm gonna Alt I right there, so I know that I'm scaling it at that point. I guess that's not the case. So let's just look at this. One point. Oops. Yeah, I really messed up the mouth. That's the takeaway that I got so far, is that I've messed up the mouth. Okay, I'm just gonna set that, zoom in, and see, like, observationally, I put it way down over here and it needed to come back up here. And so we can fix that. We'll just go ahead and get that mark going. And then it looks like I got the nose okay. But no, I kind of scooted the nose all the way over here and the mouth all the way over here. So this whole thing needs to come back up. All right. But the rest of it is okay. I feel like I did a pretty good job getting the rest of it down, so that's good. So I can just get that mouth going a little bit further back and the nose going a little bit further back. but then the rest would be observation, just to make sure that I've got that going. So there you have it. I mean, it takes a little bit to kind of get likenesses going, and some of those lines are pretty easy to start messing up. But if you've got the tool and likeness is what you're going for, then I don't see any reason why to use Photoshop as a light table and get your proportions, and then you still have to make a ton of other decisions along the way in terms of how you want your marks to lay,